Hi, everyone. We're going to welcome you all to the Environmental Review webinar. Today, we have some folks from the Office of Planning and Budget on our team. So I am Jen Wade. I'm the Grants Division Director at OPB. We have Jonna West, who's our Grants Manager. We also have joining us RSM's David Luker, the Director with RSM. And from EPD, we have Audra Dixon, the Wastewater Regulatory Program Manager, as well as Asmita Patel, the SERP Coordinator. Okay, so we're going to go over some important FAQs. Just a note, we do have these posted on our For Grantees website under the Important Documents section. They are our post-award FAQs, and they outline a lot of great information stemming from 2 CFR 200 requirements and procurement, etc., payment request, timing of payments, what to include in your payment requests, how that will flow, as well as what we were here to talk about today, which is the environmental review, the SERP process, and how that will go as well. As you all know, NEPA is not applicable to state fiscal recovery funds, but there are additional environmental policy requirements at the state level. So you do have to follow state and local policy, even though NEPA is not applicable. For this, the requirements that will be subject to the state fiscal recovery funds is going to be your state environmental review process under EPD. More information on ARPA state fiscal recovery fund SERP process can be found at their dedicated website that they have stood up. It is linked here. It is also on our website and also in the FAQ, that post-award FAQ. Additional information that will be that we will go through in this webinar will be published under the webinars and tutorials section of the For Grantees website as well. We do want to note it is the responsibility of the subrecipient to consult with the appropriate state office, which would be EPD in this scenario, with regards to the project's impact and any necessary environmental review. Please note that consultation with the appropriate office needs to be completed prior to beginning any projects for those projects that have not begun. We do understand that some of these projects may have already started, given the fact that ARPA allows us to go back to March 3rd. But please note that your grantees will be required to submit environmental review documentation prior to any payment request submissions or any payments going out to the grantees. So that will be a requirement. Section 106 of NHPA does not apply to Treasury's administration of state local fiscal recovery funds, including funds that are under the revenue loss, public health, economic impacts, water, sewer, or broadband eligible use categories. However, projects supported with payments from the funds, from other additional funds, may still be subject to Section 106 if they involve participation from other federal agencies, including funding from other federal financial assistance programs, or are subject to receipt of approvals from other federal agencies. So if you received state fiscal recovery funds for a water, sewer, or broadband project, for example, and your match that you put into your application is a federal source or other source that requires approvals from federal agencies or has financial assistance from the federal agency, then those may still be subject to Section 106 of NHPA. And as the grantee, it is your responsibility to reach out to DCA, and we do have some information on that on our website as well. Subrecipients must upload all environmental review documentation in the portal during the payment request submission. The following documents will be required as uploads under the environmental review process category before any payments will be paid to grantees. This includes cost effectiveness analysis where this is applicable, SERP categorical exclusion, notice of no significant impact, or DCA Historical Preservation Division's response letter to the project with regard to NHPA Section 106, only where applicable though, right? Those projects with participation from other federal agencies or other federal funding that have those stipulations. All right, David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. So I know many of you are familiar with RSM's role in this program, but just as a reminder, we serve as a monitoring and audits control mechanism to prevent, detect, and deter fraud and instances of non-compliance in the ARPA program. As you also likely know, final rule and 2 CFR really serve as some of the primary governing or guidance documents, and final rule attempts in many ways to mirror the drinking water and clean water revolving fund eligibility requirements, as well as some of the compliance requirements. Appendix 2 to 2 CFR 200 also includes compliance with the Clean Air Act and Federal Water Pollution Control Act, in addition to equal opportunity and Davis-Bacon and others. And so these are things that our team will be confirming and validating compliance with through the review of the supporting documentation that Jen mentioned on the prior slide. So we will be obtaining and reviewing those documents at the payment request submission, through that process. We also have an ARPA inbox that is included in the slides for submission of those documents if you'd like to submit them beforehand, before your initial payment request submission. We're happy to look at those and include them in our files in advance of that process. With respect to the SERP process, I'm sure EPD is going to cover a lot of this in their portion of the presentation, but just at a high level, Jen mentioned that categorical exclusion or notice of no significant impact will be documents that we would be obtaining through the monitoring and audits process, as well as the approved environmental plan, in addition to the various permits that EPD issues as a part of their process. Jen also mentioned the cost effectiveness analysis, which applies to new drinking water systems, dam and reservoir rehabilitation projects, and projects for the extension of drinking water service to meet population growth needs. So we will be obtaining and reviewing those cost effectiveness analyses where applicable, just to make sure that they conform to the general requirements of 40 CFR Part 35, which include alternative flow reduction, capacity of alternatives, consideration of revenue generating applications, the cost of the capital and operating and maintenance activities for the project, and those sort of things. So it is important to note that cost effectiveness analysis are not required for lead line replacement or remediation projects. One final component of our work is that we will be supporting on-site inspections and interviews of personnel on these projects, which will include but not be limited to discussions and investigations in regards to the disposal of materials or the importing of materials onto project sites, compliance with the environmental plan, that chemicals used on the project conform with EPA or USDA compliance requirements, as well as general compliance with local laws, ordinances, and other requirements that are dictated or directed by the local jurisdictions. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some of these notes with you guys, and as a monitor or control mechanism, when in doubt, document; when in doubt, ask questions, so that we can make sure that the proper supporting documentation is provided to prevent any holdup of reimbursement requests or payment requests. So with that, I'll turn it over to EPD, and thank you guys for your time.
Good morning. My name is Audra Dixon. I'm the manager of the Wastewater Regulatory Program in EPD's Watershed Protection Branch. I want to thank OPB and their contractor for helping put this together this morning. The information here will be posted on EPD's website as well to help facilitate any projects to meet your timelines. So while my program drafts water quality permits for industrial and municipal wastewater treatment facilities in Georgia, we are also the reviewing engineering projects and will be performing the state environmental review process, commonly referred to as the SERP, for ARPA projects here in the state. In this presentation, I'll provide the applicable history of federal and state regulations, an overview of the state environmental review process, discuss categorical exclusions, commonly referred to as CEs, notices of no significant impacts, commonly referred to as NONZs, environmental review planning documents, public notices and hearings, and then we'll finish up with common questions and then recommendations for submitting an approvable document to meet your target deadlines. So entities that receive state fiscal recovery funds, not local ARPA funds, were provided in 2020 and 2021 for water and sewer infrastructure projects are being administered by OPB and must go through the state environmental review process. I'm just going to refer to it as SERP as we move forward. This is the same environmental review process when you apply for clean water state revolving funds through GFA, except the applications will be submitted directly to EPD and will not go through GFA. The big difference for the state ARPA funding really is that it is just distributed through EPD, the project, and again, not through GFA. So please don't submit those projects to them. We've got information on our website to help facilitate the receipt of that information. So if you'll visit our website for additional information regarding the required documents and forms to be submitted, an overview of the project, and then our contact information is there as well. For wastewater projects, you may contact myself, Benoit Coase on my team. Also, August Lucas is going to be our SERP coordinator. All engineering projects moving forward have to be submitted to the program's email address provided on the screen here at gaepd.wrp@dnr.ga.gov. This is going to help us facilitate those projects to make sure they get assigned and you get your feedback in a timely fashion. We're hoping to be able to create a web-based portal to receive those documents, but again, until then, please submit it to the email address. So on the federal level, the National Environmental Policy Act was signed into law in 1970 and required federal agencies to assess the environmental impacts for proposed projects. And then in 1987, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund was authorized to fund a variety of water quality projects, including the construction and operation of wastewater treatment plants to reduce pollution in our waters. In the state of Georgia, the Georgia Environmental Policy Act required the Georgia Environmental Protection Division, or EPD, to issue guidelines to assist agencies in preparing environmental impact reports and conduct a review like the ones required under NEPA. In 1989, Georgia State Environmental Review process was approved, and EPD began reviewing all state revolving fund projects. EPD conducts the SERP process for projects funded or partially funded by the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, the Appalachian Regional Commission grants, and the American Rescue Plan Act, in compliance with the Georgia Environmental Policy Act. At the end of EPD's review, EPD will issue either a categorical exclusion, CE, a notice of no significant impact, NONZ, or an environmental impact statement, referred to as an EIS. The EIS is not common, and most projects will result in a categorical exclusion or a NONZ. If your project could be subject to an EIS, we would urge that you reach out to us before you submit anything. For a categorical exclusion, EPD requires a project description detailing the purpose of the project, applicable maps showing the project location and the impacted area. For a NONZ, EPD requires an environmental review planning document with a narrative description of the project, its purpose, applicable maps showing its location and affected areas, analysis of project alternatives, and analysis of the environmental impacts. The specific requirements for both can be found on our website or by contacting us at our program's email address, again shown at the bottom of this slide. CEs are less involved, so we're going to talk about those first. So categorical exclusions are for projects that do not have a significant effect or impact on the environment. Some project examples that could be covered under a CE include things like installing a backup generator, replacing aging equipment with newer equipment, installing influent screening at a wastewater treatment plant, or maybe replacing existing pump stations, rehabilitating existing sewer lines to reduce inflow and infiltration, or purchasing a mobile generator to move between pump or lift stations for sewer-related projects. Projects outside of this scope can be submitted as a NONZ, which we're going to discuss later in the presentation. The requirements for a CE's project description includes a narrative describing the project and its purpose and maps indicating the impacted area. The map should have coordinates on them so the stakeholders can better identify where the project is going to take place. And since both CEs and non-CEs require maps, I'll discuss the requirements for them in a little bit more detail later on. So on the slide is an example of an applicant's project narrative description and purpose for the CE. The project description can be brief, but it should provide enough detail to understand the full scope and impacts of the project. The more thorough the project description, the faster EPD can review it and get your feedback. For example, if the project is for a sewer rehab, the linear footage and diameters of the sewer line being rehabilitated should be mentioned. If the project is for facility rehabilitation, describe the equipment or tanks being rehabilitated and the need to upgrade them. The individual steps of the CERT process for a CE are shown on the slide, but there are a couple of main takeaways. Upon receipt of an application, EPD will review and respond to the applicant with any comments prior to issuing a CE, and will notify the applicant if the project cannot be covered under a CE, thus requiring a non-Z. We will send you a letter of denial for the CE. If the applicant did not contact other state agencies about the project, EPD will send the CE with the project description to the other state agencies for their review. However, we do highly recommend the applicant reach out to the other state agencies before submitting the project to us. This allows the applicant to respond to any questions or comments from those agencies and revise the project description prior to EPD submittal. Once all comments are adequately addressed, CEs are signed by the EPD director and put on public notice for 30 days. Once the public comment period is complete, all public comments have been addressed, EPD will send the applicant a letter confirming the completion of the CERP. If complete, accurate, and the approvable applications are submitted and everything goes to plan, the target timeline for completing a CE is about 60 to 90 days. So that concludes the categorical exclusion, and we'll move on to the non-Z. So an applicant preparing a non-Z's environmental review planning document can go to EPD's website and download a copy of EPD's planning document guidance. In the next few slides, we'll go over that information. So notices of no significant impact are for projects that could have a significant effect and impact on the environment. Project examples that will be covered under a non-Z include increasing the level of treatment to meet a new permit limit, expanding a treatment plant to discharge more treated wastewater, installing a new biosolids facility at a wastewater treatment plant. Other projects could be constructing new pump stations, expanding sewer lines to new areas of the municipality, and increasing the size of sewer lines for sewer-related projects. An overview of the need for the project, its scope, and what alternatives was determined to be the best by the applicant will need to be submitted. A description of the project area, including current site conditions, location, and the proximity to the applicant, will also need to be provided. The effluent limitations and the current performance of the facility, specifically if it's meeting its permit limits, should be included in the document. Actual effluent characterization and any observed trends in the effluent, current population, and how that relates to the current wastewater flows should be included in the planning document. And then if the project scope involves upgrades to an aging equipment or an expansion, this should be discussed and the issues surrounding that project. Regarding future situations, a 20-year population growth projection in the area and how it will impact wastewater flows will be required. Future land uses and environmental situations with and without the project. An evaluation of potential alternatives with the individual alternatives depending on the scope of the project. For instance, a sewer extension, alternatives such as reclaiming, recycling, or land application of wastewater may not be applicable. But for the new expanding facility, all these alternatives would need to be considered. A no action would mean doing nothing, and what would that result be? The alternative is used to demonstrate the future impacts without the proposed project. Maximum operation means optimizing performance at the current facility without making any physical upgrades to the equipment, just operational changes. Regional solutions involves utilizing another facility to handle the additional flow as opposed to expanding the current facility or constructing a new one. For example, building a pump station and new force main from a new development to an existing wastewater treatment plant that could treat the flow instead. Innovative and alternative technologies means analyzing alternatives that use a different treatment process, especially one that is newer. For example, constructing a membrane bioreactor system as opposed to an oxidation ditch. For sewer extension, alternative routes that could be analyzed and used. Reclaiming and recycling of wastewater would be upgrading the plant to produce reuse quality wastewater so that an expanded discharge would not be necessary. Copies of EPD's reuse guidelines can also be found on our website. Soil suitability for land application would be constructing a land application system as opposed to a new or expanded point source discharge. The LAS alternative must utilize an application rate and appropriate land acquisition costs. Those are current today costs. If the project is all ready for the expansion construction of an LAS, this alternative can be disregarded. The best alternative would then be selected based on the environmental impacts, implementation, and present worth analysis, along with any comments received from the general public and other state agencies. The present worth analysis, again, is based on a 20-year time period, which includes both capital costs and operation and maintenance costs. The alternatives should be compared using multiple factors, not limited to environmental, feasibility, costs, and others. Simply using cost as the only factor will not be sufficient. Some of the most common environmental impacts are listed on this slide. The others can be found in EPD's planning document guidance that is on our website. So direct and indirect impacts should be described for each category, evaluating whether the impact results immediately from the action of construction or whether it is the result of the project implementation and the relative severity of the impact. Interagency coordination should be taken into account for these categories. If an agency has concerns or recommendations for the project, they should be addressed under the applicable category. Most projects will result in some degree of impact to some of these categories. The document must demonstrate that these impacts can be sufficiently mitigated through best management practices or by other means. A general description of the proposed treatment process or proposed sewer lines or pump station, including cost estimates based on a preliminary design, an outline or schedule of the project implementation, the final requirements of the project, funding sources, and if there is a financial impact to the applicant's customers, a user charge system. Environmental justice refers to what indirect impacts from the proposed project will disproportionately impact or displace minority or low-income populations. If the applicant is within the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District, we require a compliance certification from the Water Planning District. All applicants who are local governments must be in compliance with the Department of Community Affairs Service Delivery Strategy. The individual steps for the CERP process for a NONSI are shown on the slide, and you can see there are more steps that need to be completed. But again, we have some main takeaways. A public meeting must be scheduled prior to submitting the planning document to EPD, with the public notice being advertised at least 30 days in advance. If other agencies are not contacted prior to submitting the planning document, EPD will contact them for you. However, similar to our CEs, we recommend the applicant contact those agencies to help expedite the process and include any responses from the agencies to the planning document before submitting it to us. EPD will almost always send comments on the planning document to the applicant, adding any comments that were received from other agencies. Once the public meeting has been held and all comments are adequately addressed, EPD will issue the NONSI signed by the director and will put on public notice for 30 days. Then once the public notice is complete and any public comments are addressed, EPD will concur with the planning document, and that would complete the CERP process. While the timeline for completing a CE is around 2 to 3 months, a NONSI can take a little bit longer. Generally, the target time frame is more of a 4 to 6 month timeline. This is very much dependent on the documents that are submitted to us. The more complete, the more accurate, the better the maps, the faster the process. So the requirements for the public meeting, which are only required for the NONSI, are listed on the slide here. If the planning document does not contain or EPD does not have copies of the listed items here, EPD will not issue the NONSI. So we highly suggest you get ahead of it, provide that public notice, and have that meeting. This is just an example of the public meeting advertisement. a blank template of the advertisement that can be found on the last page of our planning document guidance. We're happy to provide that to you. A small subset of the projects that could be covered under a NONZ are called indirect potable reuse. Projects where one municipality's drinking water source is augmented by another municipality's wastewater source. While there is guidance document available on our website, there are two main impacts for the NONZ's planning document. One, additional discussion and information for water supply and water resource environmental impacts is required. And the public meeting that has to be held must be scheduled and held in coordination with EPD. EPD must be present at that meeting. So those are the big takeaways for the NONZ. For requirements for both a CE and a NONZ, we require maps, interagency reviews, and public notices by EPD and the applicant. Again, the project meeting for the criteria of a NONZ and the public notice is in addition to the applicant's public meeting. So the public notice that the EPD puts out is separate from the public meeting for the NONZ. EPD also requires maps of the project area to be provided that show relevant features of the surrounding area, along with more detailed depictions of individual improvements. For a general overview map, a screenshot capture from Google Earth is adequate, while the more detailed depictions can be found from the project's engineering design documents. Please make sure your maps have road names, lat longs, the date of the image, if that is been taken recently or in the past. Here are some of the examples of maps that work really well. They show an impacted area, close-up of the property. Also, you can provide a map of the wetlands or impacted water bodies. For a sewer project, we need a map of the roads where the sewer lines will be placed or the proposed impacted land areas with legible and identifiable areas. Please include a scale, a north arrow, and a legend. Please do not send copies of copies as they're generally not legible, and we'll ask for you to send us another map, and that could delay the project. For both CEs and non-Zs, I did mention interagency reviews. So the slide provides a list of the state agencies we send applications to for review. Depending on the project scope, not all agencies need to be contacted. If the project is for a CE, the Wildlife Resource Division's non-game and endangered wildlife program does not need to be contacted. These agencies are only contacted for non-Z projects. Or if the project isn't for a sewer line, the Georgia Department of Transportation does not need to be contacted. Each agency has 30 days to review the project description or planning document. For a CE, EPD sends the agency a copy of the CE, which contains a brief project description and the maps. For a non-Z, EPD sends the agency a full copy of the environmental review planning document before issuing the non-Z. EPD cannot complete the SERP until all interagency comments are addressed. So this is why we highly recommend you sending that project description or planning document to those agencies in advance to submitting it to us. This allows you to take into account their comments and update or revise the SERP or update your CE or non-Z as needed. So on the next few slides, there are mailing addresses for the various state agencies. We also have a spreadsheet we can share with you that has the addresses along with some other notes about when to share the project description or planning document. These are the addresses for WRD's headquarters office and Georgia Department of Community Affairs Historic Preservation Division. Again, we encourage you to reach out to these agencies ahead of sending your application to us. Addresses for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. Addresses for WRD's non-game and endangered wildlife program, Georgia Department of Transportation's Environmental Services, and a map of county assignments for each regional commission. Do note that the map for each regional commission has dated addresses, so please double check the addresses before mailing. And then the public notice. So a public notice is required for both CEs and non-Zs after they are signed by the EPD director. Recall, this is in addition to the public notice and meeting required for the non-Z. Additionally, EPD will post the CE or non-Z on our website and send the notice to those signed up for the Gov Delivery listserv. A link to EPD's public notice announcement is shown on the slide here. And then to conclude my portion of the presentation, I'm going to run through some responses for FAQs and recommendations for successful project submittals. A common question we receive is, what's the difference between a non-ZEAS planning document and an environmental information document? You'll hear us refer to that as an EID. An EID is prepared for projects involving a new facility, an expanding facility, or upgrades to meet a new or more stringent permit limit to document the awareness of all potential environmental impacts resulting from the project. While the purpose of the EID is like that of a non-ZEAS planning document, a planning document requires more information than the EID. It's only required when the project is funded by a Clean Water SRF, ARC, or ARPA, and fulfills the state's requirements for completing an EID. Long story short, an applicant doesn't need to do an EID if they're completing a planning document. Listed on the next few slides are the key differences in what a non-ZEAS planning document requires compared to an EID. Planning document requires discussion and evaluation of other possible alternatives, present worth analysis with both capital costs and operation and maintenance costs covered over a 20-year planning period between all possible alternatives, reasons for selection referencing environmental impacts, implementation, and present worth analysis. Population projections to show that the project is sized adequately for a 20-year time period, whether indirect impacts from the proposed project will disproportionately impact and or displace minority or low-income populations, compliance certification if the applicant is within the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District, compliance with Department of Community Affairs service delivery strategy for applicants that are local governments. For a non-ZEAS, do not limit the possible environmental impacts to the plant site and construction-related activities. Applicants need to think holistically about possible indirect and long-term impacts on the environment. We strongly recommend applicants reach out to the state agencies prior to sending the project description or planning documents to EPD to make sure all of their comments are adequately addressed in the submittal. In addition, for non-ZEAS, we will not issue the non-ZEAS until all state agency comments are addressed in the planning document. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Resource Divisions often provide a list of protected species and critical habitats that could be impacted by the project. Applicants often attach their responses and move on to the next thing. However, the applicant needs to explain why the project will not impact the listed species, or if the species will be impacted, what BMPs or mitigation is going to be required or put into place to ensure those species are protected. Again, we really do recommend you reach out to these agencies ahead of time to make sure that we are limiting the back and forth with comments and discussion to help meet your timelines. Typically for a non-ZEAS, HPD requires a phase 1 archaeological survey, and HPD recommendations must be discussed in the planning document. For projects that impact beaches, dunes, shorelines, and coastal areas, a project description or planning document need to be submitted to the Coastal Resources Division, along with the distance from the project area to the Atlantic Ocean. For each environmental impact, the impacts on the project need to be both classified as direct or indirect, and primary, secondary, or cumulative, in addition to quantified as major or minor. In addition, for projects that have multiple components, for instance, both the wastewater plant and the sewer system are impacted, and environmental categories for all portions of the projects must be evaluated in the planning document. Wetlands, floodplains, and groundwater recharge areas will require maps to show if any of the project areas are within their boundaries. The URLs for floodplains and wetlands are provided on the slide, while groundwater recharge areas can be found in the hydraulic atlas. This concludes the wastewater presentation for the SERP. On this slide is my contact information, along with Benoit Coast, manager of the municipal permitting unit in the wastewater regulatory program, and then August, who's the environmental engineer and SERP coordinator. And I will then pass it on to Esmita to talk about the SERP process for drinking water facilities.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Asmita Patel. I'm from an environmental engineer and SERP coordinator for EPD's Drinking Water Permitting and Engineering program. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about the SERP review process for State American Rescue Plan Act funds. So let's see. ARPA funds are awarded to the water systems to reinforce the infrastructure by the state. As you all know about the GFA projects that undergoes a complete environmental review, the ARPA projects also will also undergo an environmental review in accordance with state Georgia's environmental review process. Depending on the project scope, EPD will determine whether the proposed project will have a significant environmental impacts or not. So let's see what are the different types of the project determination. Today we are going to talk about categorical exclusion, CE, notice of no significant impact, non-C, and we also have environmental impact statement, just like wastewater, but same. They are not very common. So we're going to skip this part for this presentation, and we will only discuss CE and non-C. First of all, let's just discuss what are the projects that are eligible for CE. The first category will be replacement of existing and construction of new water lines in previously disturbed areas. For example, if a water main breaks or if the water lines are deteriorating and aged, that they needs to be replaced, those kind of projects will fall under CE. Second is improvements to existing surface or groundwater treatment plants. For example, this will have if a surface water plant requires a filter replacement or a demolishing of the chemical building and constructing a whole new building will also fall under CE. The next category will be installation of new or replacement of existing backflow prevention devices or meters at existing customer service connections. In this, the new service connection, metering the new service connections will not qualify for a CE that falls under another category, and the applicant needs to contact EPD before they go with this project. The next category will be installation of fencing, alarms, monitors, and other security equipment at existing water system locations. This is a part of extra security to the water system. The next would be land acquisition for source water protection and integral to the project for all the water system that needs to be in compliance. The last categories is new wells or replacement of wells if ancillary to the existing water system supply. This can be confusing because if you are just applying for a new well project, that will fall under non-Z. But if it's ancillary, for example, a water system has 3 wells, one of the well does not meet the MCL and needs to be shut down, and depending on the water system's demand, they need to construct a new well. So that project will fall under CE. If there is any confusion, you can always contact EPD and we will clarify that if this project is a CE or a non-CE. Now let's go with the projects that are not eligible for CE that will automatically fall under non-CE. The projects that requires issuance of a new or modification of an existing drinking water permit, or it could also include where you need to increase your surface or groundwater withdrawal permits. Any modification or issuance of new permit will require a non-CE. The second will be the projects that have significant adverse effect on the quality of human environment. The third will be the projects that directly or indirectly affect cultural resources, such as archaeological or historical sites, habitats of endangered or threatened species. And the last is environmentally important natural resource areas, such as floodplains, wetlands, aquifer. The last projects that will not qualify for CE will be the projects that are not to be cost effective or to cause significant public controversy. So let's, once we know what are the projects will fall under CE and non-CE, let's discuss how this process works. All the applicants need to submit a preliminary project description to EPD. The contact information where to send this project description is at the end of the slide, where I have all the contact information listed. And also you will find that contact information on our EPD's website. The link is also provided at the end of this presentation. Once EPD receives the project description, it will be assigned to one of the engineers within the drinking water permitting and engineering unit. And the engineers will send the applicant an initial letter acknowledging that the project has been received and we are working on it, and all the documents that are required in order for EPD to issue a CE or a non-CE. The third step will be upon receiving project description, EPD will make initial review whether the projects will fall under CE or a non-CE process. So let's talk more about how this CE process works. It typically takes from 30 to 60 days for a CE, for EPD to issue a CE and issue the final planning approval letter. So the first step is, as mentioned, the applicant will submit project description to EPD. Unlike wastewater, EPD drinking water will not submit the project description to the agencies. The applicant needs to submit those. So the agencies which we are drinking water requires are U.S. Fish Wildlife Services, Historic Preservation Division, and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The applicant submits the project description to the cross-cutter agencies and simultaneously to the EPD, and all the correspondence from the agencies to and fro needs to be submitted to EPD so that drinking water department is in the loop. There are some special kind of projects which require less time. That is the projects that includes meter replacement, transmission line replacement, generator replacement. And in those cases, EPD will not wait for the cross-cutters to respond back or give any comments, because projects like meter replacement, it is to be understood that there will be no impact on the for the Historical Preservation Division or for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we assume that only the letters should be sent from the applicant to the agencies. Once we know we have a proof that all the letters have been sent, EPD will issue a CE and it will be published on the EPD's website, and along with it, it will be also published on the Gov delivery for 30 days for any public input. The other projects, EPD will wait for cross-cutters to comment. They do have an expiration date. The cross-cutter agencies will have 30 days to respond back. If they don't reply in those 30 days, then EPD will go ahead and issue a CE and will be posted on the EPD's website. Simultaneously, EPD will submit the CE to the applicants so that they can publish that in the local newspaper for 30 days. We will also require a proof that the water system or the applicant has published in their local newspaper, and we'll need a newspaper clipping. Once the CE has been published in the newspaper 30 days over for on the EPD website. If there are no adverse comments received, EPD will go ahead and issue the final planning document. If there are adverse comments received, then applicants shall work with the agencies, resolve the issues, and notify EPD about it. And finally, once everything is resolved, EPD will go ahead and issue the final planning approval document. CE is a very simple process. If any of the projects, if any of the cross-cutter gives and comments, applicants shall work with the agencies, mitigate the measures. If that's not possible, then they can also change the project scope and qualify for CE. If they want to go ahead and mitigate the measures, they can go ahead and process it as a non-C. So let's see how the non-C works. The applicant shall submit EID or a planning document. More detailed information is given by the wastewater as well. So I'm going to skip that part, what is required in EID and planning document. Similarly, EPD, the applicant will submit EID or the planning document to the cross-cutter agencies and the EPD. In non-C process, EPD will review the cross-cutter comments. They will wait. They will need their comments, or at least will give 30 days for the agencies to reply. The projects like water elevated tanks on historic property, water mains near landfills, water mains across DOT right-of-way, water mains across surface water will require mitigative permits from these agencies. So the applicants need to identify if they will need the permits and start with the process of applying the permits well ahead they submit anything to EPD. Just like wastewater side, applicants shall hold at least one public meeting in regarding the proposed project 30 days prior, and the meeting needs to be published on the newspaper 30 days prior to the meeting. EPD will require meeting minutes and attendees. After 30 days of the expiration of the letter submitted to the cross-cutter agents or the receipt of comments, whichever comes first, EPD will issue the non-C, and it will be published on EPD's website, and also will be given to the applicant to publish that in the local newspaper. After 30 days period, the non-C is being uploaded on the EPD's website. If there are no adverse comments, EPD will go ahead and issue the final planning document. If there are any adverse comments, same process. Applicants shall work with the agencies, or if they have any comments from the public, needs to work with them, mitigate the measures, resolve the issues, notify EPD, and finally EPD will issue a final planning approval document. Non-CE is a little bit longer process. So compared to CE, it will take at least 60 to 120 days for the review. And CE, as CE will only take 30 to 60 days for review, depending again on what information we have received, depending how fast we receive all the documents, the comments from the agencies, depending on all the other factors. So this is it. I have a DWSRF guidance link on this page and the review process flowchart of the ARPA. You can review all the SRF guidance and see how you prepare EID and planning document for the non-C. Everything is on the in the guidance, and the ARPA flowchart will give you a complete flowchart of what I just showed in my CE and non-C process presentation. And here are the contact information. You need to submit all the project description to Peter Vogel, which is the Drinking Water Permitting and Engineering Unit Manager. Manny Patel, you can contact him. He is the Drinking Water Permitting and Engineering Program Manager. And there is my contact information if you have any questions. Thank you.